Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, oh boy, Jimmy Butler got traded, so we had to do a bit of an emergency podcast. We're going to talk to Derek Bodner and Jon Krawczynski from over at The Athletic. They obviously cover the two teams involved in this deal. Jimmy Butler is going to the 76ers and leaving the Minnesota Timberwolves. So the first guy that I've got here is Derek. So Derek, this one kind of came out of nowhere to me. Like, I know that Jimmy has requested a trade, and this is something that's been brewing for a little while, but it just seemed like Philadelphia wasn't really the team, right? It never seemed like they were the one that was at the forefront of this. No,
I wasn't really expecting this at all either. And part of that is that the Sixers have been very far out of the Jimmy Butler sort of, trade rumor narrative. Part of that is because I think most people were focused on teams who didn't have cap space next summer because they really needed Butler's bird rights to be able to keep him long term, whereas the Sixers had cap space. Part of that is because internally there was, a lot of discussion that there was concern about, or at least that it was a significant factor about integrating Butler into the locker room and into the clubhouse. And, I think the asking price just fell so low and the dysfunction in Minnesota was so high that the risk was so much mitigated that it's a kind of deal you can't pass up. Look, you and I have both been, pretty big Robert Covington fans in terms of his value as a role player, his value of the contract. But when Robert Covington is a centerpiece for a trade for a legitimate star player, and the centerpiece that's coming along without any real draft capital, they're giving up like a 2022 second-round pick, but that's pretty much worthless in a trade value, and without any real high-value young players, star equity young players, you're pretty much at a point where it's very hard to turn that deal down. And look, there are concerns, right? Like there's concerns about Butler's personality. That's not breaking any news. And there are concerns about Butler's next contract, that 5-year, $190 million contract he can sign. And you're worried, could the last 2 years of that, when he's making $40+ million a year, and he's at 32, 33, 34 years old, with Tibbs minutes under his career, could that be an albatross? And that's certainly a concern. But it's just, what you can do for the next 3 or 4 years if this works out is so high that it's a risk you're willing to take.
All right, Derek, I think we covered it all. See ya. No, first and foremost, this podcast will be sponsored by DraftKings and Simple Contacts. But I think that it's worth discussing this in a little bit more detail for people who are unaware of the full trade package, as Derek has kind of laid it out a little bit. It is Jimmy Butler and Justin Patton for Dario Saric, Robert Covington, Jared Bayless, who's on an expiring contract, and I believe, 2022 second-round pick. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
So, like Derek said, the price, what was your initial kind of thought on the price point in general? Because I don't think it's a bad trade for Minnesota by any stretch of the imagination. And it is kind of exactly what we always expected it to look like, I guess, because Tom Thibodeau has always wanted guys that he can go to battle with right now. Just in general, what was your first impression of the price point? Because you've said it like it got to a point where it was so low, but to me, this isn't an inexpensive trade for Philadelphia either.
No, I think if you were like painting the perfect scenario of the Sixers making an acquisition like this, it would have been to keep Robert Covington as well. Having a Butler, Covington, Simmons, Embiid defensive pairing would have been terrifying for the rest of the league. But Covington is a very good defender, obviously first team all defense last year. That was probably a little bit weighted or a little bit slanted because, Kawhi Leonard was out for so much time. There's some injuries which made that possible. But Covington's a very, very good defender and a very versatile defender. He makes shots, streaky, but he makes shots. He helps space the floor. He is the off-ball player the Sixers need. And his defense really is the outside of Embiid, and Embiid's, defensive player your candidate, a legitimate defensive player your candidate. He is probably their most versatile team defender. I think Simmons probably has more natural ability as a switching forward, but his rotations are so on point and they're so accurate and they're so consistent that he really helped make the Sixers be what they have been defensively, which last year was the number 3 team in the league, and this year was on the rise. I think they had moved into the top 10 and were getting close to that point after a slow start. So he is a loss, and having that on these two players can be pretty easily compared in Otto Porter and Robert Covington. Robert Covington's making about 40% of what Otto Porter is. Like, you're talking about a $10 million contract versus a $26 million contract. And the Sixers did a great job of using their extra cap space last fall to then get him on a renegotiated and extended contract, which kept his cap hit very low for the remainder of the contract. And losing that kind of value, it is going to be, if this Jimmy Butler trade doesn't work out, it does limit your trade flexibility going forward. And that's probably the biggest risk. And also then how do you fill out the remainder of the roster for the season so that you actually get the bump up in this first year that you're expecting. And look, I think Butler is going to be an important piece. Watching this team, they very clearly needed somebody who can create on the perimeter, somebody who can run out of a pick and roll and create in half-court sets. Right now, they really only have Embiid who can create in the half-court, and their offense became stagnant because of that. And doing so while also getting a guy who's shooting 38% from three-point range this year and is an elite defender. I mean, I think they have the core now to be a much better team this year, but they are going to have to fill out the remainder of that roster.
Yeah, to me, that's the biggest thing that they acquire here. Philadelphia needed someone at the end of the game they could give the ball to that wasn't just throwing the ball down on the block to Joel. Because Ben, for as good as Ben is, I predicted Ben would be an all-NBA guy this year. He hasn't quite lived up to that yet, but there's still plenty of season left. He still struggles in end-of-game scenarios just because there's no threat of the jump shot. There's no threat of the pull-up. With Jimmy, it's always there. Jimmy can always create either out of a ball screen, out of isolation, and he can always get to his jump shot and at least give you a chance either late in the shot clock or at the end of games to get something up there. You know what I mean? So that, to me, is the biggest addition that Philadelphia possibly could have made. Now, there's a question as to whether or not this helps them enough this year that you have alluded to. And I understand that they are losing 2 starters, like Dario Saric, for as poorly as he started this year, is a starting quality basketball player. Robert Covington, we've kind of talked about as being the perfect complementary starter in today's NBA. But for me, maybe they do take a small step back in the regular season. It's going to take some time to figure this all out. The chemistry stuff on the floor is going to be fascinating because all of Joel and Ben and Jimmy really like to have the ball in their hands. But what I think it does do is it creates a much better team in the playoffs because you now, instead of having Robert, who really struggled in the playoffs last year because his shot wasn't falling, you have a guy now in Jimmy who can go out and get his own shot, who can defend at a high level. He's a better one-on-one defender than what Covington is. Would you agree with that?
Oh, for sure. Yep.
Yeah, he's a better one-on-one defender that you can legit throw on as a stopper against the opposing team's best perimeter player. And you can allow Ben now to kind of float and play center field against the team's worst player on offense. And I think that actually has a lot of value for Simmons as a great defender because we know how good he is in help situations, getting into passing lanes, getting just kind of letting his length and natural athleticism and strength take over. But I do think that this is going to have a trickle-down effect on the rest of their defense in the playoffs, at least being a little bit better.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it's one of those things where getting these Sixers had quite literally no player who could shoot, dribble, and defend. There's nobody on the roster who can do all 3 of those things. And it was a huge weakness in the playoffs. It was going to continue to be a huge weakness. And if you get one of those guys who's, a top 15 to 20-ish player, filling out, there's always, maybe not to the level, but there's always going to be buyout candidates. There's always going to be trade targets. Someone like, Marco Bellinelli last year, Kyle Korver this year. You can find ways. Finding ways to get those guys is a lot easier than finding ways to get a Jimmy Butler. So I always say, if you're going to take a step back in the short term, that's fine. You can find ways. Even maybe Landry Shamet continues to develop, and he can be a legit piece. I speculated right now that their best starting lineup might be, J.J. Redick and Landry Shamet, just because they need that floor spacing so much. So you can find ways to get these supplementary pieces. I do think the loss of depth is going to hurt a little bit. I do also think it is a short-term problem that you can overcome that. Yeah,
hot take, but it's a lot harder to get starters than it is to get guys like Marco Bellinelli and Ersan Ilyasova. Yeah, like, look, I mean, I would expect a trade at some point for a Kyle Korver, for someone who can really shoot the ball. Buyout candidates prop up every single season. Who knows? Maybe Trevor Ariza at some point is a buyout candidate, given how badly that Phoenix Suns situation is. And to me, he's kind of the perfect guy for this team because he can make a spot shot as well as be a defender. Like, he would basically replace exactly what they lost in Robert Covington, right? So to me, like, that is... there are going to be guys available, and if you have a chance to go out and get Jimmy Butler and you assume that you can sign him, which, you know, is kind of the next place that we should go after we talk about this a little bit more in terms of the on-floor fit, then, yeah, this is a no-brainer for Philadelphia, I think. Now, the big question in terms of on the floor, I've mentioned it once already, is just there's only one ball, right? And Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, Jimmy Butler, these guys are all very ball-dominant players. There's going to be an adjustment for this, and my guess is that it's going to have to be Ben who adjusts. Because right. Jimmy, Ben has never played with a perimeter player who likes to have the ball in his hands as much as Jimmy Butler does. Jimmy loves to run side pick and rolls. He loves to, kind of initiate offense coming down the floor occasionally in a grab and go situation. Like that, a lot of these situations where Ben initiates offense, they are going to go to Jimmy just naturally because within the flow of just running offense in the NBA, it's going to be hard for Ben to just rack up as many possessions as he does now whenever you have a guy like Jimmy on the court. For
sure, and I think this is kind of the blueprint they were looking for when they drafted Markelle Fultz, is to get a pick and roll player, because that's really not Ben's game. Ben's game really isn't creating in the half court. That's been a weakness the Sixers have had. Like I said, they just don't have anybody who can really create from the perimeter. And I think, like I said, a lot of people talk about the Markelle Fultz trade and draft selection and wonder why the Sixers were looking for an off-ball player. And I don't think they ever drafted Markelle Fultz. I mean, nobody watching him at Washington said, yeah, we're going to draft him number one because of his off-ball prowess.
Right.
So I think they were always looking for this kind of a skill set to fit alongside Ben Simmons. What they need, first of all, is Ben Simmons be okay with that. Yeah. And he bristled at times.
I think that is the best case for Ben. He does need someone next to him who can create, but yeah, like you said, he needs to be comfortable with it. You know what I mean? Like he needs to be willing to take a step to the side, not even back, just to the side in half court situations and not be the primary initiator.
And he bristled at that at times last spring when he was asked about it. He, very definitively, I'm a point guard. That's where I play. And he's been a little more receptive to it to start this season because they knew they had to integrate Markelle Fultz. And at the very early part of the season, especially in the preseason and the first couple of games, it seemed like they did give Fultz a little more ball handling responsibility when the two shared the court. And they were running a lot of action to try to get, set screens for Simmons to post up and get position and try to use some of the points of emphasis in terms of off-ball contact to get Simmons to the foul line. That kind of went away as Fultz struggled a little bit, and Simmons was dominating the ball like he did last year. And, I think, obviously, Ben Simmons, I looked at the numbers earlier this week, and I think he was like 0 for 10 in terms of spot-up shooting. He legitimately hasn't made a spot-up jumper all season. That's a concern. Again, not breaking any news there. But they really want to get him better as an off-ball player, off-ball movement, because they do recognize that weakness in the half court. So I think this is kind of a fit that they need to get to in terms of Simmons being comfortable doing this, in terms of Simmons finding ways to, use his size and mismatch ability to find ways to contribute off the ball, because they need someone of Jimmy Butler's and or Markelle Fultz's ilk to help their half-court offense go. So I think you're right. He has the biggest adjustment to make. I think it was an adjustment they needed to make.
Yep.
But it's very different from any role he's ever played before, and that's a very big concern.
So you bring up the Fultz of it all. It's a great question, and it's a great point that I think that part of the reason they've tried to integrate Markelle Fultz into the starting lineup this year is because they recognize that they do need another creator next to Ben on the floor, and because they saw Ben as a guy that, or they saw Markelle as a guy that needed to play with starters at some point to just try and see what they have at the very least. They need to know what Fultz can be, and maybe he's not ready for this. I think that very clearly the fit between Ben and Markelle has been problematic throughout the course of the season so far. But, I mean, where does he go from here? Because, if you're the Sixers, you already have TJ McConnell, who is a very, very competent backup point guard at the very least. The fit between Fultz and Simmons hasn't been great. Jimmy Butler is known for being hard on young players. I have concerns about what happens with Markelle here. Like, I have very real worries that this was not the best thing for him.
Yeah. So in the most optimistic viewpoint you could possibly take, you would say, okay, look, Markelle now has much less pressure on him. He doesn't have to be that kind of half-court pick-and-roll creator. He can be eased back in to that role as he gets more confident in his jumper. And clearly he is nowhere near that level of confidence right now. Like, whatever they're doing in terms of rebuilding his jumper and rebuilding his confidence is not at the point where it is complete. So the pessimistic side of, the Markelle Fultz fit and future is right now Markelle Fultz, he adds value in two ways, or at least theoretically adds value in two ways. The first is pushing the ball in transition, and the second is really playing pick and roll in the half court, which is how he gets not only to the rim, but also to his comfortable pull-up shooting range, which is right around the foul line area. He's really been hesitant to shoot off the ball and from three-point range. I mentioned Simmons shooting 0 for 10 on catch-and-shoot jumpers. I think Fultz is around 2 for 14, just going off the top of my head. So he's been real reluctant. He's looked much better shooting off the dribble on pull-ups right around that foul line. So now you look at the Sixers, and Ben Simmons is going to play 34, 35 minutes per game. Jimmy Butler at times is going to push 40 minutes. At least history says he will. So there's going to be very few minutes Fultz is going to have where he's not going to be on the court with one, if not both of those players. And he has his very serious weaknesses off ball, and he's going to have fewer opportunities than ever to mitigate those with what strengths he does have. So fit-wise, especially if you're going to talk about Jimmy Butler being here for 5 years after this one, essentially 6 years, it's going to be tough for Markelle Fultz to be the best version of Markelle Fultz he can be, and the version he needs to be in order to offset his current deficiencies. And like I said, maybe, this takes pressure off him. He can get back to a confident state with that jumper, and he can, change the narrative of who he is and his strengths and weaknesses and what he has to overcome. But that's going to take time. And you do worry a lot what his role will be on the court for the team this year. Whether I frankly don't see how they can continue starting him. I think one of the side impacts of this trade is that you can almost sneaky move Markelle Fultz to the bench because they're going to need off-ball shooters, at least one, maybe two, in players like J.J. Redick, in players like Landry Shamet, or maybe when he gets back up to speed, maybe a little versatile defender like Wilson Chandler. A ball-dominant player who right now has no idea how to contribute off the ball. It's going to be real tough to make that fit between Simmons and Butler.
So yeah, here is where I'm at on this. Like, I kind of have a weird thing. Like, I kind of think they should send him to the G League. It's not because I don't think he is an NBA quality player now, but I think it is the best place for him to develop right now. Because while the pressure is no longer on him to contribute necessarily, the pressure is on the team now to try and win now, even in a way that it wasn't before, which is crazy. But this is a very clear, hey, we're trying to make the finals this year. If we don't make at least the Eastern Conference Finals, it is a failure of a season. That's what this move says to me, at least. And I would, if I was the 76ers, want to, it's a shifting of pressure. It's not like a thing where the pressure, drops off of Fultz, it just changes to something different. So if I was the Sixers, I would just try and move him to the bench or move him to the G League, let him try and regain some mojo and see what happens. To me, that just makes sense, especially whenever you have a real backup point guard in TJ McConnell, and you have Landry Shamet, who to me fits better as an off-ball guard in the NBA, but he can at least initiate sets in the NBA.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, there's so much that comes into this in terms of confidence and psyche and how that impacts, a player who is clearly going through such confidence issues like Markelle Fultz is.
Yeah.
But it's a fair point. The kid needs playing time. The kid needs to be put in a position where he is comfortable on the court and where he can succeed and build his confidence that way. It's a great question. You don't typically see former number one draft picks sent down to the G League. But this is going to be a tough spot right now to put him in positions where he's comfortable. So you do consider it for sure.
We haven't talked about Dario Saric really yet.
No.
And I really like Dario. I think he's a very good basketball player. Legit, I think he's an NBA starter right now. You look at what his numbers were last season. It was a perfect complementary piece. for the 76ers to have on the court. He started like shit this year. Like, we can just kind of call that what it was. He played terribly to start the year. I still really believe in him. Having said that, for the 76ers, he always struck me as either the sixth man or as trade fodder, just because I've always been kind of skeptical about the way he plays on the floor with Ben.
Yeah, and I mean, look, Dario has his limitations defensively. Like, I think he's a smart defender. I think he gives effort, but I think he was averaging about 0.2 blocks a game and like half a steal a game. Like, he just doesn't have the reflexes or the athleticism or the lift to really impact the play in that way. He doesn't have the kind of switching ability I think that you would typically want, especially on a team. You know, one of the benefits of drafting a guy like Ben Simmons is that you have a lot of, you know, he can basically run your offense while having the size to compete as a four and the foot speed to defend a point guard. And you have this chance to build this really versatile defensive team that can switch pretty much anything. And Dario kind of got in the way of that a little bit because he just that's not his style of play.
And by the way, that's what the 76ers have started to do this year. They really do want to switch everything.
They do. And in theory, you know, what you're concerned about is replacing not the shooting Dario was having this year because he was struggling mightily, but the 39% shooting. And really, I think he was shooting about 43% after the new year last year. He was a key part. That shooting was a key part in that run, that floor spacing. In theory, it should be able to easier to replace that with a guard who maybe has a little more in terms of ball handling, a little more in terms of shot creation, and maybe even a little more positional versatility defensively than it is to lock yourself into a four, to let Simmons, you know, move up the court, move up the rotation, and defend that power forward spot a little more full time. Brett Brown has been a little hesitant to do that. He's always looked for kind of that traditional face-up, perimeter-oriented four in Dario Saric, in Ersan Ilyasova. Even this year, they've been using Mike Muscala in that role a lot. I would like to see them kind of move away from that because I think one of the ways, if you're going to lose Saric's shooting, one of the ways to do that is to kind of untap the inherent benefits of switchability that you have in a Jimmy Butler, you know, Ben Simmons defensive, you know, front court. So that he is certainly, and look, Dario's a great guy. Like I said, he's a real smart defender, a real smart player, gives a maximum effort every time. Everybody loves him. And you are going to miss his shooting when the shot is going in. And quite frankly, the last 3 or so games, he looked like he was finally turning a corner.
Yep.
But I do hope at least one of the side benefits is they can become a little more versatile defensively.
The last thing that I want to bring up here is that this deal really doesn't affect their long-term building strategy at all. The only thing it really does is it affects their their flexibility in trades just with salary matching. Losing the Covington contract actually does kind of hurt there. But they lose essentially what? Like, I want to say it's like $15 million in cap space, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So
sounds right.
They're still going to have like $21 million right now in projected cap space, and someone will take a chance on Markelle Fultz, I think. Like, a team like, say, the Phoenix Suns should trade for Markelle Fultz if the 76ers decide, hey, we want to get rid of Fultz's $9.7 million next season. So that they can get up to max salary cap space pretty damn easily now. And they have the added benefit, and that is with including Jimmy Butler's cap hold, and they have the added benefit of being able to pitch free agents on Jimmy Butler, Joel Embiid, and Ben Simmons. So I look at this as kind of a no-brainer deal for Philly. I know that there are inherent risks. I know that the fit on the floor is not necessarily the easiest thing, but like whenever you also account for the fact that they're going to be able to go out and use real salary cap space this summer and be a real player on that market, this is an easy deal for me, man.
Yeah, I mean, I was running the numbers, and basically if you just go off of Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, and Jimmy Butler's cap hold, and then throw in 9 unused roster spots, which is basically about $900K, until you get to 12. So basically $900,000 cap hits because they don't have enough players on their contract. You would be just shy of a 35% max. But you can definitely get to a 25 and a 30% max. So can you put yourself into a position for somebody like, you know, Chris Middleton, someone of that ilk, maybe even Kemba Walker? I assume he's probably going to get close to the max, but someone in that range, maybe someone who's willing to take a couple million less as a starting salary to go join a, you know, what could be a super team. You can certainly do that. And they have a lot of flexibility. Like you said, about $20 million, assuming they don't make any trades. You start shipping off, you know, Markelle Fultz. Some of the younger players they have, they can clear a lot of cap space. I have to double check. I think it's just short of a 35% max, but it's significant. And if you go into free agency with a big three of Embiid, Simmons, and Butler, and you can sell someone on, look, we just made an Eastern Conference Finals run. We're close. You can make that sales pitch, and also you're a little less reliant on it now than you were, 24 hours ago, because you have that third guy who theoretically fits. So, yeah, I've always been a little lukewarm on Jimmy Butler because of the personality conflicts, because I'm a little concerned about that next contract. A lot concerned, to be honest, about that next contract. But the price you gave up is so little relatively. And like I said, not to diminish Covington or Saric. I think, like I said, we've both been fans of theirs for a long time. But when you trade for star-level players like this, two-way star-level players who could legitimately, if they work out, push you into NBA Finals contention, this is a relatively little deal to give up. It's a low risk to make. And even if you have some concerns, and look, there's, like I said, this could go in many different ways, where it's either Jimmy Butler's track record proves to be a continued concern, or it could work out where the Sixers are NBA Finals contenders. And as long as you have that upside in play, I think this was a pretty easy decision to make.
Yeah, I'm with you. Derek, thanks for coming on, man. We're going to be here in just a couple of minutes with Jon Krawczynski, also from The Athletic. Before I let Derek go, though, do you want to plug anything? Anything you want to tell us about that you're writing?
No, I got nothing going on.
Yeah, it's not like
Check out The Athletic. Subscribe if you can. That's all.
Not like any big deals just happened or anything.
Right.
All right, we'll be back in a minute here after some advertisements with Jon Krawczynski. Thanks, Derek.
Thank you.
Before we get to Jon Krawczynski, I have an advertisement for you. The first sponsor of today's podcast is DraftKings. Basketball season is finally back, and you know what that means. It's time to put your basketball knowledge to the test with one-day fantasy basketball at DraftKings. DraftKings is giving away over $400 million in prizes this season. That's more than 10 times what Los Angeles is paying the king himself. No matter what your skill level is, there's a contest waiting for you at DraftKings. Drafting your team is simple. Just select 8 players and stay under the $50,000 salary cap. Earn points when your players score, assist, block, rebound, and more. And the best part is you get to draft a new team every day without any commitment. If you download the app and head over to DraftKings.com now and use my code THEORY, THEORY, to support the show and play for free with your first deposit. And remember, there are going to be $400 million in total prizes up for grabs throughout the season. That's code THEORY to play for free with your first deposit, only at DraftKings.com. $5 deposit minimum is required. Eligibility restrictions apply. You can go see DraftKings.com for details there. The second sponsor today is Simple Contacts. You guys know how big a fan I am of Simple Contacts. It is the most convenient way to renew your contact lens prescription and reorder your brand of contacts from anywhere in minutes. Instead of heading to the doctor year after year to renew your prescription for something that you wear every day, you can just do it on your own time and terms in just a few easy minutes. This truly is vision care for the 21st century. How does it work? You just take a 5-minute Simple Contacts vision test online. It will be renewed by a licensed doctor, and you'll receive a renewed prescription and reorder your contacts. All you need is your current contacts and internet connection and 10 feet of space. Even if you're totally out of contacts, they've got an option for you too. Why would you use Simple Contacts? It's because it's convenient, fast, reliable. It offers choice, and it's going to save you money. The vision test is only $20. If you compare that with an appointment without insurance, that's going to cost you up to $200. And really, the contact lens prices are absolutely unbeatable. Here's the deal. I can offer you $20 off of your first order with the code GameTheory20. That's GameTheory20. You're going to get $20 off your contacts at simplecontacts.com/GameTheory20, and you enter that code GameTheory20 at checkout. Look, this isn't a replacement for your periodic full eye health exam. They only test that your current prescription still helps you see 20/20, and that they can help you renew your prescription. They don't write completely new scripts or anything. But if you order contacts with what you've got already, I can give you $20 off on that GameTheory20 code. Now, back to the show with Jon Krawczynski. All right, we're here now with Jon Krawczynski from over at The Athletic. Jon has been at the forefront of all Jimmy Butler news so far this season. Every single story that he has written has just been ridiculously good and ridiculously detailed from top to bottom. Jon, how does it feel to finally get to have a mini vacation from all of this? Let's start there.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Sam. I appreciate that. But right now I would say that, I'm not quite started the vacation yet. I'm packing for it. I have my plane ticket. I've ordered the Uber to get me there, but I'm not there yet. I got about probably 2 to 3 stories to wrap this whole thing up and kind of encapsulate this saga. And once we're there, then I will be able to take a deep breath, maybe put my toes in the sand and order a margarita and try and relax a little bit, because it's been an unbelievable 2 months here of just nonstop drama and headlines and all of those things. So I'm definitely looking forward to having a little time here where I don't have to be on red alert 24 hours a day. That's for sure.
So speaking of being on red alert 24 hours a day, you told me that right before we started recording that you were out in a play area with your kids whenever this happens. So even you, who have been at the forefront of this whole deal from the start, got a little bit caught by surprise by this, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was almost by a necessity. Shams and I had been working this really for the last few days and kind of started to get an inkling last night that something could come down. Unfortunately, my wife had left for out of town because she had to go visit a friend to celebrate an engagement and kind of go through that whole sort of thing. And they have had this planned for a little while here. And if I would have told her, hey, sweetie, there might be something that happens with Jimmy Butler tomorrow, so I'm going to need you to stay home. She's heard that about 1 million times in the last two months. And something never has happened. And so she went. And so I was with my kids all alone. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. And, what do you do to kind of keep them occupied? You take them to play area to let them get some of their energy out. And I just had to hope and pray that it would hold for a couple of more hours. Unfortunately, it didn't, and so there it was. So while they're climbing the jungle gyms and going down the slides, I'm taking phone calls from sources and working with Shams and getting that story out. So it was a little hectic this morning, that's for sure.
So what was your initial reaction? Is this, you hear the pieces that are going one way, you hear the pieces that are going another way. How do you kind of comprehend all of this as it's going down?
Yeah, you look at it, and do I think it's a tremendous deal? No. They essentially, the Wolves giving up not only Butler but Patton, and then also only getting a second-round pick instead of a first-round pick. Not tremendously ideal, certainly for trading a player of Butler's caliber. But that said, they were in an awfully difficult position, and most of it was above their own doing. But they had to make a move now. They go 0-5 on the trip. They're coming home for 10 of 12 home games in this next stretch. The fans are totally revolting on this entire franchise, and they literally could not have afforded to go one more game with Jimmy Butler on the roster. And unfortunately, other teams know that, and they see it. I mean, Jimmy Butler has not been shy about expressing things. I mean, certainly reports from myself and Shams and ESPN and others have outlined kind of the dysfunction that has beset this franchise. And so at some point, you just had to get to a position where you made the decision that any more time in the current state, you were inflicting incredible damage to your franchise, to your young players, to everything around it. And so they finally came to the conclusion that, yes, we have to trade him. And so when you get into that position, then you got to go and find things. And I think, getting Dario Saric, a young player who can develop and who's already had some bright moments in this league, getting Robert Covington, a defensive-minded, hard-nosed guy who, hasn't been great this year, but has, a reputation for work ethic and for dogged kind of a dogged approach, I mean, I think they can come in right away and help. And so ultimately the decision I really think they had to make, Sam, was do they want to prioritize guys who can help them right away and then be on this roster for the next couple of years, or did they want to go the Houston route and get just draft picks and assemble those assets over the course of the next 4 or 5 years? And they decided to go the other way, and so we'll see how all the pieces fit together. But I thought they got some talented players, and I thought for the position that they were in, they did okay.
So yeah, I agree with you. I actually like this deal for Minnesota, and it's because they got 2 guys who are cost controlled. Robert Covington, as we talked about, Derek Bodner in the first part of the podcast here. He's on a 4-year contract that's like $44 million, $43 million, something like that. Dario Saric is in the 3rd year, if I remember correctly, of his rookie contract. Has one more super cheap year at like $4 million or $3.5 million, and then is going to be a restricted free agent, so you keep his rights long-term as well. Young player who's still developing. He was really, really good last year, as we said at the top of the podcast, who struggled a little bit to start this year, but seemed to be kind of snapping out of it a little bit lately. I mean, it's a deal that helps them both long-term and short-term, I think. They get 2 starting quality players who can come in and replace some of what Jimmy does. They're certainly not going to be as good as what Jimmy was, but they're going to replace a bit of what he did. And then on the other side of things, long-term, they get guys that they can actually build around now with Karl Anthony Towns and with Andrew Wiggins and with all of the other guys on this roster who might be there for the long term. So overall, I think it's a deal that makes a lot of sense. And you bring up a great point about the timing here, because I mean, the funniest fucking thing in the world to me was that literally yesterday it breaks that like there's an agreement between Glenn Taylor and Jimmy Butler to play Jimmy only 32 minutes a night. And then last night against Sacramento, he plays 41 minutes. And then Sam Amick from our website, The Athletic, interviews him afterward. And he goes, "You played 41 minutes tonight." And Jimmy just goes, "That shit has to stop." And he asks why.
That shit
he goes,
stop.
"We got fucking 14 other guys." And I'm like, what are we, like, this has to end. This has to end now. And the 10 of 12 at home is a great point. It was just a perfect confluence of events, but it should have ended sooner. Like, there's no reason for it to get this far.
No, you're right. I mean, it's absolutely should have ended sooner. And they had opportunities, and we've reported earlier in camp or in the season that Miami made Josh Richardson available. I think this Philly deal has been available forever. Like, they could have done this at any point. And the other thing that you look at was that I think that Tom Thibodeau really had in his mind a scenario where they start the season with Jimmy. They play really well because they're talented, and they won 47 games last year and all that, and that Jimmy was going to change his mind and want to stay here long term, and then that would secure Tibbs' spot here long term as well. Obviously, that didn't happen. I mean, they weren't. They were playing so poorly. I mean, they're second to last in defensive rating. They're 17th or 18th in offensive rating. They're just really, really struggling. And so it became abundantly clear early on in the process that this wasn't working, but Tibbs was sticking to his guns and was hoping that if they held out long enough, there would be some magical deal that appeared out of nowhere that was going to save everything. And that just was unrealistic. And I think finally the owner, Glenn Taylor, got involved last night and into this morning as well to say, I'm making a decision here. We're getting this done. And now here we are.
So that kind of raises the question then, because I actually like this deal best out of all of the potential deals, depending on what Miami was potentially offering, right? In addition to Josh Richardson. Like, was it Josh Richardson and Kelly Olynyk? Was it Josh Richardson and Dion Waiters? Was it, it depends on what the additive was from Miami. But I like this deal a lot because it gives them both, as I said earlier, the cost control long-term as well as the help now that apparently Tom Thibodeau wants. To me, this is the one that made a lot of sense, I guess. Like, the 4 first-round picks from Houston, like given the fact that Jimmy, James Harden, and Clint Capella all would have been under contract long-term with Houston after Jimmy would have ostensibly signed his long-term deal with Houston, given the fact that it's basically home for him.
Right.
Like, they're all going to be under contract through 2023 anyway, so you're going to get 3 picks in the 20s and then like 1 pick that's a maybe 7 years down the road. I like this deal better than that one. Like, I think that like just isn't a great deal if you're Tom Thibodeau or if you're Minnesota. And then, we can talk about the Miami thing, but what did you think of this deal in general?
In terms of the Philadelphia deal or
just the Philadelphia deal versus all of the other potential options?
Yeah, I mean, you're right in terms of, I guess with the Houston offer, the only thing that I thought it had the potential for was that I think, I mean, you look at the way the Rockets are playing and you look at Chris Paul is older and Jimmy has his injury issues and things like that. I mean, it's possible that 2 of those picks could have been lottery picks eventually. Now that's a stretch maybe, and you can use some of those to move off of other deals if you want or things like that. But I agree that I think Philly, the one thing that I'm still trying to grasp or wrap my mind around is, how good can Josh Richardson be? Because I think he's played really well to start this season, and to the point where Miami just ostensibly said earlier this week that Richardson is no longer available. We're not going to give him up, and he's under a contract that is so affordable that I thought, well, if you want just the one guy who has the potential to be a higher end player, maybe Richardson is the guy there. But you're right, you have to take a Waiters back. Probably you would have, would they have done Olynyk? Maybe. So I look at that deal. I do look at this Philly deal though, and I do like it. Like, I mean, I like the pieces that they've gotten there, who I think, what you see and what they bring to the table, it's going to bring a more well-defined pecking order with the Wolves. I think that was the question, or the tug and the pull, the push and the pull with this current iteration of the Wolves with the Jimmy Butler era, was you had Butler and Towns and Wiggins, and I think Butler and Wiggins in particular tripped over each other a lot. And so for, better or worse, I think you look at a Saric and Covington slotting in clearly behind Towns and Wiggins on the pecking order. And if Wiggins can kind of accept the new opportunity that's going to be there now with Jimmy Butler gone, I mean, that could change the game for them a little bit. Now, we haven't seen a whole lot of evidence to suggest that he's ready for that or willing to do that, but that's going to be the interesting thing as this shakes out. How much of it is going to be addition by subtraction and just kind of getting that weight off of their shoulders that could help them move forward in a more positive direction? Yeah,
for me, I mean, we'll see. I don't know. Like, if I was them, I would probably look to move one of Andrew Wiggins or Dario Saric now. The reason for that being that their 4 best players now basically all play the 3 through the 5, wherever you want to slot Robert Covington. I honestly think Andrew Wiggins' best position is probably the 4 long term. Especially if we get into like year 4 of this contract, he's just going to be better able to take advantage of his athletic gifts. He's already a very good post player whenever he gets mismatches on the block. To me, like that just makes sense, I guess. But you can play Robert Covington with Karl Towns as a defensive insulation in a big way that you can't with Andrew Wiggins and Dario Saric. So I would probably look to move one of those 2, because I think that now you're in a place where you do have the overlapping parts again, but they're just in a different spot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the one thing that I agree with you on Wiggins in terms of his post-up ability and how that does kind of position him well to play the 4. He just has not shown any inclination to be a rebounder at all. And that's the big problem. That's one of the problems they've had this year, is that their perimeter guys are not rebounding at all, and so that's led to extended possessions for the opposing offense, and just they're hemorrhaging points right now. And so if Saric kind of becomes more of that 3-4, guy, and Wiggins is actually, you can somehow, make him more of the 2 and the 2-3. I know. I mean, you're talking handle, you're talking a lot of things that have to happen. I mean, there's a lot of things they got to look through here and try and figure out how these guys fit together. But you're right in terms of, like, I think Covington has definite long-term fit here. Yep. And so then it is, and then let's even say that you did decide that you wanted to move Andrew Wiggins. How movable is that contract right now? Yep. You might have to wait a year or so more before you can really look at that. I think that they are hoping that now that Butler is gone, that Wiggins sort of takes advantage of those opportunities. To me, the key is going to be for their success in the short term here is sort of pivoting away from the Butler-Wiggins ISO-heavy sets and rows as well, and trying to center more around Towns. Yep. and maximize him. I don't know if Tibbs has that in him to kind of change on the fly like that or not, but to me, like, that's what I would start doing if you're looking to salvage this season, which has quickly kind of spiraled out of control. Yeah,
and that's the next thing I was going to ask you about here. Like, I guess that if you're Tom Thibodeau, you're probably still competing for the now, right? Because you think that you need to probably do something to save your job at this stage. But, I mean, Taj Gibson's on an expiring contract. Anthony Tolliver is someone that could probably make sense for a lot of teams, including the team that they just consummated a trade with, Philadelphia. Derrick Rose is on an expiring contract that, right now actually looks pretty valuable to a lot of teams, I would bet, given how he's played this season. There's the baggage on that side of it. Some teams probably just wouldn't be interested in going down that road, but there are teams that would be interested in him, I'm sure. Do we think we get to the point where, like, they start considering building for next season at any stage here, or they're going to kind of play this out, I would imagine now, right?
Yeah, I think that Sam, you'll see them kind of try and let the dust settle here. Try and give weeks, a month or more of time to see how this new look group comes together, and see if they keep playing as poorly as they have been right now. I mean, if this continues the way that it has to start the season, and they go another 4-9 in their next 13. Then I think it becomes easier to pivot away from the now and look to the future. And maybe that involves Tom Thibodeau, maybe it doesn't. But what, I don't see sort of that decision being made soon here. I think they're going to evaluate it. They're going to kind of look at it, and they're going to see how everyone responds. And, if they continue to struggle, then they probably have to look at making a change with their coach. But if they somehow galvanize and start showing signs of life and energy, maybe that kind of just calms things, and they can actually, try and salvage some good feelings here before they go into, okay, let's just prepare for the future mode.
Yeah. It's a really tough spot that I don't really know that there's an answer to. I guess there's not a right or wrong answer right here, so we'll see. I don't know. It's like where I'm at with it. I'm just like, okay, I don't know. But
I think that's where you have to be right now. I don't know that there is anyone that can say definitively what's going to happen. I mean, could this be a Denver situation where you trade Melo and you get some parts back and something just clicks and they play well? Yeah, it's possible. Could they continue to struggle, or could they be unmotivated too because they're not really all that,
good right
eager to make Tibbs look great, I don't know. That's possible too. So I can see several different paths this thing taken here over the next couple of weeks. And for me, the great part of it is most of it, I think, is going to center around basketball. And that's what that has not been the case for the last 2 months.
With Justin Patton, my read on that is that he was included for luxury tax purposes.
Right.
Because they would have been like right up against the tax had they kept Justin Patton don't think they would have been over, but they would have been like right next to it. That's the impression you've gotten, right?
Yeah, that's the impression I've gotten as well. And they did not pick up his third-year option, and so there were a lot of people that were saying, wow, I mean, yeah, we know he has the foot problems and things, but that was a drastic move at the time. But it kind of, I think, was designed for this very sort of situation where if you needed to unload him to stay under the tax, which is an absolute priority for Glenn Taylor, which I can totally agree with and understand, then that's a way to do it. Now, that really does stink for the Wolves in general, as giving up a guy who was a first-round pick just 2 years ago for nothing just because you've lost him. But his foot problems have been an issue, and there is some long-term concern about those. There are people in his camp who believe that he will be fine eventually, and that he just needed to kind of get out of here and get to a place that will develop him. But
if there's any place that has a great medical track record right now, it's Philadelphia.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that it looks like my guess is that Patton will be a guy who hits the free agency next summer. Will have to take some kind of a 1-year minimum deal if he's healthy and try and rebuild himself and get back into it. But there are definitely people in his camp who believe he will continue to play and will be able to play eventually at this level. But the Wolves just did not think that was going to be the case.
Yeah, I don't really blame them for that. That's
big man with foot issues. It's a concern for sure.
The last thing that I want to talk to you about here is just kind of going into the inside baseball stuff of you hear last night that this is a possibility. You hear 2 days ago, 3 days ago, I think was your exact word. So kind of what exactly do you do? How do you go about kind of figuring out where all of the pieces are going to fall here?
Well, yeah, I mean, what it is it's like, it's constant work that you really have been putting in, not just since this thing started, a couple of, 2 months ago now, but these are relationships that you're working on building for years, really, and so it's remaining kind of in constant contact with as many of your people who are connected to this in any way, shape, or form as possible. And so if, the more that you put into that work and the more people that you are able to talk to and have open and frank conversations with throughout this process, you can kind of sort of understand the temperature of the water. And so, there were several times throughout this process where I thought they were close on a deal and they just couldn't get it done. And then there were other times where there were other reports of it getting close and you just kind of knew that, no, this isn't happening. But, in this particular case, you start to, in your conversations with people, understand that there's a sense of urgency that's creeping in here, that there's a realization of things not working. And so that's when you really pick it up, and that's when you put your foot on the gas and you're pressing your people and you're doing everything that you can and you're staying on top of it, to knowing that there's something that could happen at any time. And so, hey, I've been on the losing end of a lot of these things where I thought I was close and somebody else pops in front of us and gets it. And so the times that you can get one, they got to be celebrated, because it's hard, man. It's hard to do it, and and there's so much competition for it and all of that you hope and pray and you plug away and you hope that it can work out for you. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So
yeah, I mean, you've done an incredibly good job this entire time with it. And the last thing that's worth discussing here is just how do you think the Jimmy Butler era will be remembered? Because on one hand, the last 6 weeks have probably been an abject disaster. But on the other hand, I mean, he took them back to the playoffs for the first time in, 16 years? Is that right?
Yeah, in 13 years. So, it's a great question, because he was poised to be the next face of this franchise. He's a charismatic guy. Fans were drawn to his rugged, intensity, his no-nonsense approach. Obviously, he's incredibly talented. and has a huge effect on winning. And so you saw last year, I mean, they won 47 games. They sold out 18 home games, which was their most since like 91, 92. And so it looked like he was helping to drag this franchise out of the abyss. And so in that respect, I mean, he was incredibly admired around here from fans and people like that. But to see how it's spiraled now, to see the way that it all played out, and I think the Wolves are to blame for some of this by sort of ignoring the writing that he put on the wall and kind of painting themselves into this corner. But certainly still with the trade request, with the general soreness, with the sitting out games, with some of the frank assessments of teammates and things like that, that ended up not sitting well with many people around here in the organization and out. And so I think that the vast majority of people in town here are happy to see him go, but they'll also have to probably get a quick dose of reality on what life is going to be like without him on the court. And if they take a big step back, you know, it's kind of like, well, gosh, he was a pain in the ass, but man, he sure made this team more relevant than it had been in a long, long time. So if the other guys who stay back here aren't capable of picking up the mantle and carrying this forward, there's going to be a little more conflicting views on it. But I think right now, so many people are really tired of all the antics, and they're happy to see Jimmy Butler go, and they'll be equally happy to see Tom Thibodeau go if that ends up happening.
John, tell the people you've got coming up at The Athletic. Tell them all about your life now that you don't have to deal with this anymore.
In the immediate future here, we'll have the rest of this is we're recording this on Saturday. We'll have kind of a really big, exhaustive breakdown of the deal itself, of how it went down and what precipitated it and all of those things, and that will be coming later this evening. And then I think that you'll also see going forward in the next couple of days some follow-up work from myself, from Shams, from Sam Amick, certainly from all of the Philly guys as well, really breaking down this deal, looking at the ins and the outs, trying to kind of encapsulate this 2-month circus that we've all lived in. And so then you know, when it's starting on Monday, we'll have coverage of the arrival of the new guys, and they play Brooklyn on Monday night at home, and that'll be anticipated, and just kind of really looking forward to the aftermath and how this thing comes together. We'll cover it every possible way from every possible angle here over the next, I would imagine, at least week, and then we'll get into more of the nuts and bolts and more of the basketball stuff that I think a lot of people are eager to really dive into.
If that's not the best advertisement for The Athletic, I don't know what is. Go subscribe over there. You can read my work. You can read John's. You can read Derek's, who we talked to earlier. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Android, wherever you get Spotify, good podcasting content, or at least average in this case. Please go and do that. Rate, review, and subscribe, all that stuff. But until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.